When Hurricane Delilah tore through the small town of Millbrook, Tennessee in September 2019, it left behind more than just destruction. It revealed something unexpected about human nature, about redemption, and about the people we fear the most. This is the true story of Marcus Hammer Johnson, a Hells Angels member for 25 years, and Harold and Martha Thompson, an elderly couple who lost everything. What happened when their worlds collided would change an entire community's understanding of who the real angels are among us. Before we begin, we want to hear from you. Would you trust a Hells Angel knocking at your door? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Harold Thompson was 73 years old when the storm hit. He had lived in the same house on Maple Street for 42 years, the house where he and Martha raised their 3 children, celebrated countless Christmases, and built a lifetime of memories. The white 2-story colonial with the wraparound porch was more than just a building. It was the physical manifestation of every sacrifice, every hour of overtime, every dream they had worked to achieve. Martha, at 70 years old, still tended to her rose garden every morning. She was known throughout Millbrook for her prize-winning roses and her kindness to neighbors. The Thompsons were the kind of people who never missed church on Sunday, who brought casseroles to families in need, and who always had a smile and a wave for everyone passing by. But Hurricane Delilah showed no mercy to good people. The winds reached 130 miles per hour. The rain came down so hard it sounded like thousands of hammers pounding against the windows. Harold and Martha huddled in their basement for 6 terrifying hours, listening to their home being torn apart above them. When the storm finally passed and they climbed the stairs, what they saw broke their hearts completely. The roof was gone, not damaged, gone. The second floor was exposed to the sky, and rain had destroyed everything inside. Their bedroom, where they had slept together for over 40 years, was unrecognizable. Water poured through the house like a river. The living room where their grandchildren played was filled with debris. The kitchen where Martha had cooked thousands of meals was in ruins. Their entire life had been erased in a matter of hours. The Thompson children lived far away. Their daughter Jennifer was in California, their son Robert in New York, and their youngest, Michael, was deployed overseas with the military. They wanted to help, but none of them could leave their lives immediately. They sent what money they could, but it was not nearly enough. Insurance barely covered a fraction of the damage. The Federal Emergency Management Agency promised assistance, but the bureaucracy moved slowly while the Thompsons needed help now. So Harold did what he had always done. He picked up a hammer and started working. At 73, with arthritis in his knees and a heart condition, he climbed onto what remained of his roof and began trying to patch the holes. Martha, despite her age and limited strength, cleared debris from the yard, her hands bleeding from the work. Neighbors helped when they could, but everyone was dealing with their own storm damage. The Thompsons were essentially alone. This went on for 3 weeks. Harold would work until his body gave out, then collapse in exhaustion. Martha would make sandwiches from their dwindling supplies and encourage him to rest, but he refused. The man who had served his country, who had provided for his family his entire life, could not accept that his home might be lost forever. It was on a Tuesday afternoon, under a merciless sun, when the sound of a motorcycle engine rumbled down Maple Street. The neighbors who were outside stopped what they were doing. In Millbrook, motorcycles were rare. Motorcycle gangs were unheard of. But there was no mistaking the patches on the leather vest of the man who pulled up in front of the Thompson house. Hells Angels, the skull logo, the colors that had struck fear into communities across America for decades. Marcus Johnson was 47 years old, 6 feet 3 inches tall, with arms covered in tattoos and a beard that reached his chest. He looked exactly like what people imagined when they thought of a dangerous biker. His motorcycle, a customized Harley-Davidson, gleamed in the afternoon sun. As he cut the engine and removed his sunglasses, Harold stopped hammering and looked down from the roof. Their eyes met. Harold's hand instinctively tightened on his hammer. Martha in the yard froze. The neighbors watching from their porches felt a collective sense of unease. What was a Hells Angel doing in their quiet neighborhood? Marcus dismounted his bike slowly. He looked at the destroyed house, at the elderly man on the roof, at the woman in the yard with bandaged hands. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then Then he walked to the base of the house and called up to Harold. "Stop, I got this." Harold was confused. Martha was frightened. The neighbors were already reaching for their phones, ready to call the police, but Marcus just stood there, his expression serious but not threatening, waiting for a response. Harold called down, asking what he meant. Marcus repeated himself, his voice firm but not aggressive. "Stop working, I got this. Put down the hammer and come down from that roof before you hurt yourself." Harold did not know what to do. This stranger, this intimidating figure with gang patches, was telling him to stop repairing his own home. But there was something in Marcus's eyes, something that was not threatening, something that looked almost like understanding, like pain, like someone who knew exactly what loss felt like. Slowly, Harold climbed down from the roof. Martha moved closer to her husband, protective and uncertain. The neighbors watched, some with phones in hand, others simply staring in disbelief. Marcus looked at them both and spoke words that would begin one of the most unexpected transformations Millbrook had ever witnessed. "You should not be doing this alone. Nobody should have to rebuild their life alone. I am going to help you. My brothers are going to help you. We are going to fix this house, and we are not leaving until it is done." Harold and Martha did not know what to say. They did not know who this man was or why he wanted to help. They did not know that Marcus had been riding through Millbrook on his way to a rally in Nashville. They did not know that he had lost his own mother 5 years earlier, that she had died alone in a house that was falling apart because she had no one to help her. They did not know that seeing them struggling had opened a wound in Marcus's heart that had never fully healed. All they knew was that a Hell's Angel was standing in their yard, offering help that seemed too good to be true. And in that moment, despite every warning their minds were screaming, despite every stereotype and fear, something told them to trust this stranger. Martha was the first to speak. She asked Marcus why he would do this for them. He looked at her with eyes that had seen too much hardship, too much pain, and he gave the simplest answer: "Because someone should have done it for my mother." Before we continue with what happened next in Millbrook, we need to understand who Marcus Johnson really was. Because the man standing in Harold and Martha's yard was not the man he had been 25 years earlier. His story is one of darkness, redemption, and the long road back from a life that almost destroyed him completely. Marcus was born in Detroit, Michigan in 1972. His father left when he was 3 years old. His mother, Linda Johnson, worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. Marcus grew up in one of the roughest neighborhoods in the city, where violence was common and opportunities were scarce. By the time he was 14, he was already running with a street gang. By 16, he had dropped out of school. By 18, he had been arrested twice for assault and theft. Linda tried everything to save her son. She begged him to stay in school. She worked with counselors and social workers. She cried, she yelled, she prayed. But Marcus was angry at the world, angry at his absent father, angry at the poverty that defined his life. He pushed his mother away, telling her he did not need her help, that he could take care of himself. At 21, Marcus was sent to prison for armed robbery. He served 4 years. When he was released, his mother was there waiting for him, despite everything he had put her through. She hugged him and told him she loved him, and that she would always believe he could be better. Marcus pushed her away again. He told her he did not want her pity, that prison had not changed him, that he was going to live his life his way. 2 weeks after his release, Marcus joined the Hells Angels. For people unfamiliar with motorcycle clubs, the Hells Angels are one of the most notorious and misunderstood organizations in America. Founded in 1948 in California, they have chapters around the world. They are known for their strict code of brotherhood, their fierce loyalty to each other, and their reputation for violence and criminal activity. Law enforcement agencies have tracked them for decades. The media has portrayed them as outlaws and criminals. Society has learned to fear the skull and wings patch they wear with pride. Marcus found something in the Hells Angels that he had never found anywhere else: a family, men who accepted him without judgment, who valued loyalty above everything, who would stand beside him no matter what. The club gave him purpose, identity, and belonging. For the first time in his life, Marcus felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. But that life came with consequences. Marcus was involved in activities he is not proud of today: bar fights that sent men to the hospital, confrontations affiliations with rival motorcycle clubs that turned violent, run-ins with police that added to his criminal record. He became exactly what society expected a Hell's Angel to be: dangerous, unpredictable, someone to be avoided. His mother watched from a distance, her heart breaking. She would call him, and he would not answer. She would write letters, and he would not respond. Linda Johnson's health began to decline. The years of working multiple jobs, the stress of worrying about her son, the heartbreak of watching him spiral took their toll on her body. She developed heart problems. Her doctor told her she needed to reduce stress, to take better care of herself. But how could she rest when her only child was living a life that could end in prison or death at any moment? Marcus did not know how sick she was. He was too caught up in his life with the club, riding across the country, living by his own rules, answering to no one. The Hells Angels became his entire world. His brothers in the club were the only family he acknowledged. Then came the phone call that changed everything. It was March 2014. Marcus was in Nevada at a rally with his chapter. His phone rang in the middle of the night. It was a hospital in Detroit. His mother had suffered a massive heart attack. She was alone when it happened, in the small apartment where she had lived for 20 years. A neighbor found her collapsed in the hallway and called for help. By the time Marcus got the call, she had been in a coma for 2 days. He rode non-stop from Nevada to Detroit, 1,800 miles. He did not stop to eat or sleep properly. When he finally walked into that hospital room and saw his mother lying there, machines keeping her alive, he collapsed. All the anger, all the toughness, all the walls he had built around his heart crumbled. He held her hand and begged her to wake up. He told her he was sorry for everything. He promised he would be better. He begged for one more chance to be the son she deserved. Linda Johnson died 3 days later without ever waking up. Marcus was holding her hand when she took her last breath. The funeral was small. A few neighbors attended, some people from the church where Linda had been a faithful member for decades, and 20 Hells Angels in full colors standing in the back of the church, paying respects to a woman they had never met, but who had raised one of their brothers. The pastor spoke about Linda's kindness, her strength, her unwavering faith that her son would find his way back to the light. After the funeral, Marcus went to his mother's apartment to sort through her belongings. What he found there destroyed him. The apartment was falling apart. The roof leaked. The heating barely worked. The walls were cracked and crumbling. His mother had been living in conditions that no one should have to endure, and she had never told him. She had never asked him for help. She had suffered in silence, not wanting to burden her son, even though he could have helped her, even though his club brothers would have rebuilt that apartment if he had just asked. Marcus found a box in her closet. Inside were all the letters she had written to him over the years, letters he had never responded to. She told him about her health problems. She told him about the apartment falling apart. She told him she was struggling, but more than anything, she told him she loved him. Every single letter ended the same way. "I love you, Marcus. I always will. Please come home." He sat in that apartment for hours, reading every letter, crying like he had not cried since he was a child. His mother had needed him, and he had not been there. She had died alone in a place that was falling apart, and he could have prevented all of it if he had just answered one phone call, responded to one letter, been the son she deserved. That day, Marcus made a decision. He could not bring his mother back. He could not undo the years of pain he had caused her, but he could honor her memory by being the man she always believed he could be. He could help people who were struggling the way she had struggled. He could make sure no one else died alone and forgotten in a house that was crumbling around them. When Marcus returned to his chapter, he was different. His brothers noticed. He was quieter, more thoughtful. He started volunteering at homeless shelters. He organized charity rides to raise money for single mothers. He became known in the Hells Angels community as someone who genuinely cared about helping people, especially the elderly and vulnerable. Not everyone understood. Some people thought he was going soft, but his closest brothers in the club supported him. They joined his charity efforts. They rode with him to fundraisers. The Hells Angels, despite their reputation, have a long history of charitable work that the media rarely covers. They raise millions of dollars for various causes. They protect abused children. They support veterans. Marcus tapped into that tradition and made it his mission. For 5 years, Marcus lived this new life. He was still a Hells Angel. He still wore the patches with pride. He still lived by the code of the club. But he was also a man on a mission to make amends for the past, to honor his mother's memory, to prove that redemption was possible even for someone like him. And then, on that Tuesday afternoon in September 2019, while riding through Millbrook, Tennessee on his way to a rally in Nashville, Marcus saw something that stopped him cold. An elderly couple struggling to rebuild their destroyed home alone. A man on a roof who was too old to be doing that kind of work. A woman with bleeding hands trying to clear debris. It was like seeing his mother's struggle all over again. And this time, he was not going to ride past. This time, he was going to stop. This time, he was going to help. What are your thoughts so far on Marcus's journey? Do you believe people can truly change, or is the past too powerful to escape? Share your opinion in the comments. We want to know what you think about second chances and redemption. Harold and Martha Thompson did not sleep much that night after Marcus's offer. They sat at their kitchen table, or what was left of it, discussing what to do. Martha was scared. She had heard stories about motorcycle gangs her entire life, stories of violence, drugs, and criminal activity. Harold was more pragmatic. He looked at his wife's bandaged hands, felt the pain in his own arthritic knees, and realized they had no other options. Their children could not help immediately. Their insurance was insufficient. Government aid was moving at a bureaucratic crawl. This stranger was offering help they desperately needed. The next morning at exactly 8 o'clock, Marcus returned, but he did not come alone. The rumble of motorcycle engines echoed through the quiet streets of Millbrook like thunder. One by one, Harley-Davidsons rolled onto Maple Street. 5 motorcycles, then 10, then 15. When the engines finally cut off, 23 Hells Angels stood in front of the Thompson house, all wearing their colors, all carrying tool bags and equipment. The neighbors came out of their houses, some in shock, others in fear. Mrs. Peterson from next door immediately called the police. Mr. Chen across the street grabbed his phone and started recording. The Millers 3 houses down locked their doors and closed their curtains. Within minutes, police cars arrived, sirens blaring. 2 officers approached the group. Marcus stepped forward to speak with them. The conversation was tense. The officers wanted to know what a motorcycle gang was doing in a residential neighborhood. Marcus explained calmly that they were there to help rebuild the Thompson house. The officers were skeptical. They asked for identification from every single member. They ran background checks. They made it clear they would be watching closely. Harold came outside and confirmed that he had invited them. The police reluctantly backed off, but made it clear they would have units patrolling the area constantly. As the officers left, Marcus gathered his brothers and made something very clear. They were there to help, not to cause problems. No drinking, no drugs, no confrontations. Anyone who caused trouble would answer to him personally. Then the work began. What happened over the next 3 weeks would become legendary in Millbrook. These hardened bikers, men with criminal records and fearsome reputations, worked from sunrise to sunset. They brought their own tools, their own materials, their own expertise. Several of them were skilled tradesmen. Jake Bulldog Morrison had worked construction for 20 years. Tommy Wrench Davidson was a certified electrician. Carlos Ghost Martinez was a master carpenter. They rebuilt the roof completely. They replaced damaged walls. They restored the plumbing. They rewired the electrical system. They worked with precision and care, treating the Thompson house like it was their own, and they refused to accept any payment. Every time Harold or Martha tried to offer money, Marcus would shake his head and say the same thing. This is not about money. This is about doing what is right. the transformation was not just physical. As the days passed, something unexpected happened. The neighbors who had been terrified at first began to soften. Mrs. Peterson, who had called the police that first morning, brought out lemonade on the third day. The bikers thanked her politely. Mr. Chen, who had been recording everything, started asking questions about motorcycles. The Millers eventually came outside and offered to help with the yard work. Martha cooked for the bikers every day. She made sandwiches, baked cookies, prepared huge pots of coffee. She treated them like family, and they treated her like she was their own mother. They called her Miss Martha. They made sure she never lifted anything heavy. They listened to her stories about raising her children and grandchildren. Some of them shared their own stories, their own struggles, their own regrets. Harold and Marcus developed a particular bond. As they worked side by side repairing the house, they talked. Harold learned that Marcus was not a monster. He was a man who had made mistakes, who had suffered loss, who was trying to be better. Marcus learned that Harold was a veteran, that he had served in Vietnam, that he understood what it meant to be judged unfairly based on appearances. One evening, as the sun set over Millbrook, Harold asked Marcus why he really did this. Marcus stopped working and looked at the house they were rebuilding. He told Harold about his mother, about how she died alone in an apartment that was falling apart, about the letters he never answered, about the guilt that haunted him every single day. He told Harold that every time he helped someone, he felt like he was making up for not being there when his mother needed him most. Harold put his hand on Marcus's shoulder. He told him that his mother would be proud of the man he had become. That redemption is not about erasing the past, but about choosing to be better in the present. Marcus, this tough biker who had faced down rival gangs and survived prison, broke down and cried. Harold held him while he sobbed. This elderly veteran comforting a Hell's Angel like he was his own son. But not everyone in Millbrook was warming up to the bikers. The city council held an emergency meeting. Some members wanted the Hell's Angels removed from the neighborhood immediately. They cited safety concerns, property values, and the reputation of the town. The mayor, a cautious man named Robert Jameson, was caught in the middle. He understood the concerns, but he also saw what was happening. The Thompson house was being rebuilt by volunteers. No laws were being broken. No crimes were being committed. The local newspaper ran a story. The headline read, "Hell's Angels Invade Millbrook." The article was sensationalized, focusing on the gang's criminal history rather than their charitable work. Television news crews showed up. Reporters interviewed nervous neighbors and filmed the bikers working. The coverage was almost entirely negative, playing into every stereotype and fear about motorcycle gangs. Marcus and his brothers ignored the media. They kept working. Every day, they arrived at 8 and worked until dark. The house slowly came back to life. The roof was secured, the walls were rebuilt, the rooms were restored. It looked better than it had before the storm. Then something happened that would change everything. On the 18th day of the reconstruction, Harold was working in what used to be his study. He was sorting through water-damaged boxes, trying to salvage what he could. He found an old photo album that had somehow survived. As he flipped through the pages, he stopped at one particular photo. It was from 1969, during his time in Vietnam. He was standing with his platoon. One young soldier in particular caught his attention, a kid who could not have been more than 19 years old. Harold remembered that kid. His name was David Martinez. He was from Los Angeles, scared and homesick. Harold had taken him under his wing, taught him how to survive, kept him alive during some of the worst fighting of the war. On one mission, their unit was ambushed. David was pinned down, wounded, certain he was going to die. Harold ran through enemy fire and dragged him to safety. He saved David's life. Harold had lost touch with David after the war. That was common. Soldiers came home and tried to forget. They moved on with their lives and rarely looked back. Harold had always wondered what happened to that scared kid from Los Angeles. He looked at the photo more closely. The name on David's uniform was clear: Martinez. David Martinez. Harold walked outside, where Carlos Ghost Martinez was working on the porch railing. He approached carefully and asked Carlos a question. Did he have family from Los Angeles? Did his father serve in Vietnam? Carlos stopped working. He looked at Harold with surprise. He said yes, his father, David Martinez, had served in Vietnam. He came home, got married, had Carlos, and died in a car accident when Carlos was 12 years old. But before he died, David had told his son stories about the war, about a sergeant who saved his life, about a man named Harold Thompson who dragged him to safety during an ambush. Harold showed Carlos the photograph. Carlos stared at it in disbelief. That was his father. That young, scared kid was his father. And the man who saved him was Harold Thompson, the man whose house Carlos had been helping to rebuild for the past 18 days. The two men stood there in silence, processing this impossible coincidence. Then Carlos called out to Marcus. When Marcus came over, Carlos explained everything. Marcus looked at Harold, then at Carlos, then back at Harold. The odds of this were astronomical, that a Hell's Angel helping an elderly couple would turn out to be the son of a man that elderly veteran had saved 50 years ago. Word spread quickly through the group. Every single Hell's Angel working on the house stopped what they were doing and gathered. They listened as Harold told the story of the ambush, of dragging David to safety while bullets flew past his head, of saving that young soldier's life. They listened as Carlos talked about his father, about the stories he was told, about how David had always said he owed his life to Sergeant Thompson. There was not a dry eye among them. These tough bikers, these men who prided themselves on being hard and intimidating, cried openly. Because this was no longer just about rebuilding a house. This was about fate, about destiny, about debts being repaid across generations. Harold had saved David's life in 1969. Now David's son was helping to rebuild Harold's life in 2019. Martha came outside to see what was happening. When Harold told her, she embraced Carlos and wept. She told him that his father would be so proud of the man he had become. Carlos, who barely remembered his father, who had grown up angry and lost and eventually found his way to the Hell's Angels, felt something he had not felt in decades. A connection to his father, a sense of purpose, a feeling that maybe his life had led him to this moment for a reason. From that day forward, the work intensified. It was no longer just a charitable project. It was personal. It was family. The Hell's Angels worked even harder, even longer hours. They brought in more materials. They made sure every detail was perfect. This house was going to be more than restored. It was going to be rebuilt as a tribute to the connection between Harold and David, between a veteran and the soldier he saved, between generations. Thank you for staying with us this far. Your engagement means everything, and we promise the best is yet to come. The story takes turns that will move you even more deeply. Stay with us. The discovery of the connection between Harold and Carlos changed the entire atmosphere in Millbrook. The story spread through the town like wildfire. The same newspaper that had run the sensationalized headline about the Hell's Angels invading the town now ran a front-page story about the incredible coincidence. The television news crews returned, but this time their coverage was different. They interviewed Carlos about his father. They spoke with Harold about saving David's life. They showed the bikers working not as a threat, but as men on a mission to honor a debt that transcended time. Public opinion began to shift dramatically. People who had been afraid started to see the Hell's Angels differently. They were not invaders. They were not criminals disrupting the peace. They were human beings doing something extraordinarily kind for people in need. The mayor received hundreds of calls and emails, the majority now supporting the bikers and praising their efforts. Mrs. Peterson, the neighbor who had called the police that first day, became one of the biggest supporters. She started a fundraising campaign to help buy materials for the house. She organized other neighbors to contribute. Within a week, the community had raised $15,000. When they presented the check to Marcus, he was genuinely shocked. He tried to refuse it, but Mrs. Peterson insisted. She told him that the community wanted to be part of this, that they had been wrong to judge, that they wanted to help. Marcus accepted the money with one condition. They would use it to rebuild the Thompson house, but they would also use any excess to help other families in Millbrook who were still struggling with storm damage. Mrs. Peterson agreed immediately, and together they formed what would become the Millbrook Storm Relief Committee, Hells Angels and local residents working side by side to help their neighbors. The impact rippled through the entire town. Other businesses started contributing. The local hardware store donated materials. Restaurants brought food for the workers. The church organized volunteer days where congregation members joined the Hells Angels in rebuilding efforts. It was unprecedented. Millbrook had never seen anything like it, but the transformation was not just happening in the town. It was happening within the individuals themselves. The Hells Angels were experiencing something many of them had never felt before: acceptance, respect, gratitude. For years, they had been outcasts, feared and avoided wherever they went. Now they were being thanked, hugged, treated as heroes. For some of them, it was overwhelming. Jake "Bulldog" Morrison, the construction worker who had helped lead the rebuilding effort, broke down one afternoon when a little girl brought him a drawing she had made. It showed a motorcycle with angel wings and the words, "Thank you for helping my grandma's neighbors." Jake had spent 15 years in and out of prison. He had been rejected by his own family. This child's simple gesture of appreciation moved him more than anything in his life. Tommy Wrench Davidson, the electrician, started mentoring teenagers in the town who were interested in learning a trade. He taught them basic electrical work, shared his own story of how learning a skill had given him purpose, and encouraged them to find legal ways to build their futures. Several local parents approached him afterward, thanking him for being a positive influence on their children. Marcus watched all of this unfold with a mixture of pride and emotion. This was what he had envisioned when he made the decision to honor his mother's memory. This was proof that the Hells Angels could be a force for good in the world, that they could break the stereotypes, that they could earn respect not through fear, but through genuine contribution to society. Harold and Martha became surrogate parents to the entire group. Every evening, after the work was done, they would sit on the porch that the bikers had rebuilt, and they would talk. Harold shared stories from his life, his time in Vietnam, his years raising a family, his philosophy on forgiveness and redemption. Martha made sure every single biker knew they were appreciated, valued, and loved. One evening, Martha pulled Marcus aside privately. She told him something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. She said that when she first saw him standing in their yard, she had been terrified. She had seen the patches, the tattoos, the intimidating appearance, and she had assumed the worst. But over the past weeks, she had learned that appearances mean nothing, that the measure of a person is in their actions, their kindness, their willingness to help others. She told Marcus that he and his brothers had restored not just their house, but their faith in humanity, that they had shown her that angels come in many forms, and sometimes they arrive on motorcycles wearing leather and patches. Marcus hugged Martha and cried. He told her that his mother would have loved her, that in many ways Martha reminded him of the woman who had raised him, who had never stopped believing he could be better. Martha told him that his mother was surely watching from heaven, proud beyond measure of the man her son had become. As the house neared completion, discussions began about what would happen next. The Hells Angels had to return to their regular lives eventually. They had jobs, families, responsibilities, but none of them wanted this to end. What they had built in Millbrook was more than a house. It was a community. It was acceptance. It was proof that they could be more than their reputation. Marcus had an idea. He proposed creating a formal program within the Hells Angels organization, a program specifically designed to help elderly and vulnerable people who were struggling with home repairs, medical bills, or other challenges. He wanted to replicate what they had done in Millbrook across the country. His brothers enthusiastically agreed. They called it the Guardian Angels program. The name was intentional. They were taking the word angels from their club name and giving it real meaning. They would identify people in need, mobilize club members with relevant skills, and provide assistance without expecting anything in return. It would be funded through charity rides, fundraisers and donations, and it would prove to the world that the Hells Angels were more than the criminal stereotype the media had created. The first official project of the Guardian Angels program would be completing additional homes in Millbrook that had been damaged by Hurricane Delilah. Over the next 2 months, the Hells Angels, working alongside community volunteers, helped rebuild or repair 12 more houses. They assisted families who had been living in damaged conditions, unable to afford professional contractors. They brought the same dedication, skill, and compassion that they had shown the Thompsons. The impact on Millbrook was profound and lasting. Property values actually increased because of the repairs. The sense of community strengthened as people who had never interacted before worked side by side. The town gained national attention for the positive collaboration between residents and the motorcycle club. Millbrook became known not as the town that was destroyed by a hurricane, but as the town that rebuilt itself through an unlikely partnership. But there were still challenges. Not everyone was happy about the Hells Angels' presence. Some residents remained fearful and distrustful. The police continued to monitor activities closely, concerned about potential criminal behavior. And there were members of rival motorcycle clubs who saw the Guardian Angels program as a publicity stunt, an attempt to soften the Hells Angels' image for strategic reasons. One particular confrontation threatened to derail everything. A member of a rival club, the Iron Reapers, showed up in Millbrook during the 3rd week of the extended rebuilding efforts. His name was Vic Crusher Romano, and he had a long-standing grudge against Marcus, stemming from a territorial dispute years earlier. Crusher rode into town with 5 other Reapers, clearly looking for trouble. They found Marcus working on a house on Oak Street. The confrontation was tense. Crusher mocked Marcus publicly, calling him soft, accusing him of betraying what it meant to be a real biker. He challenged Marcus to prove he was still the same man, to fight like they used to in the old days. The situation could have exploded into violence that would have destroyed everything Marcus and his brothers had built in Millbrook. But Marcus did something unexpected. He did not rise to the challenge. He did not respond with violence or threats. Instead, he invited Crusher to help. He showed him the house they were rebuilding, introduced him to the elderly woman who lived there, explained what they were doing and why. He told Crusher that real strength was not in fighting, but in building. That real loyalty was not just to your club, but to your community. That real respect was earned through actions that helped others, not hurt them. Crusher was taken aback. He had come looking for a fight and found something completely different. He looked at the work being done, at the grateful residents, at the Hells Angels working alongside regular citizens. For a moment, his tough exterior cracked. Then he and his Reapers left without causing trouble. As they rode away, Crusher turned back one last time. There was something in his expression that Marcus recognized, curiosity, maybe even respect. 2 weeks later, Crusher returned to Millbrook. This time, he came alone and unarmed. He found Marcus and asked if he could help with the rebuilding. Marcus welcomed him without hesitation. Crusher worked alongside the Hells Angels for 3 days. He did not say much, but he worked hard. On the 3rd evening, as they finished for the day, Crusher approached Marcus privately. He told him that he had been wrong, that what Marcus was doing was not weakness, but courage, that it took more strength to change than to stay the same. He asked if the Guardian Angels program would accept members from other clubs. Marcus said absolutely. That moment represented something bigger than just 2 rivals making peace. It represented the possibility that the entire motorcycle club culture could evolve. That these groups, which had spent decades fighting each other and clashing with society, could find common ground in helping others. It would not be easy. There would be resistance, but Marcus had proven it was possible. 3 weeks and 2 days after Marcus first pulled up to the Thompson house, the work was complete. The house looked magnificent, better than it had before the storm. Every detail had been attended to with care. The roof was solid, the walls were straight and strong. The electrical and plumbing systems were updated to modern standards. The porch was rebuilt with sturdy railings. Even Martha's rose garden had been restored, with new bushes planted by the bikers who had learned she loved roses. The town of Millbrook organized a celebration. It was not planned as a major event, just a small gathering to thank the Hells Angels for their work. But word spread, and what started as a small thank you became something much larger. Over 500 people showed up. Residents from all over the county came to see the house and meet the bikers who had rebuilt it. Local television stations covered the event. Even the governor of Tennessee sent a letter of commendation. Harold and Martha stood on their new porch, surrounded by the Hells Angels, who had become like family. Harold gave a speech that moved everyone to tears. He talked about judgment and forgiveness, about how we often fear what we do not understand, about how the men standing beside him had shown him the true meaning of brotherhood and selflessness. He ended by saying that if these are Hell's Angels, then heaven must be an amazing place. The crowd erupted in applause. Martha could not speak because she was crying too hard. She just hugged Marcus and whispered thank you over and over. Marcus, fighting his own tears, told her that she and Harold had given him and his brothers something far more valuable than they had given in return. They had given them acceptance, respect, and proof that they could be more than their past. The mayor of Millbrook, Robert Jameson, made an announcement that surprised everyone. He declared that the third Saturday of every September would be recognized as Guardian Angels Day in Millbrook. A day to honor not just the Hells Angels who had helped rebuild the town, but anyone who helps others in need. He presented Marcus with a key to the city, an honor that had only been given a handful of times in Millbrook's history. A Hells Angel receiving a key to the city was unprecedented. But the most emotional moment came when Carlos "Ghost" Martinez stood up to speak. He talked about his father, David Martinez, the young soldier who had been saved by Harold Thompson in Vietnam. He talked about growing up without his father, about the anger and loss that had led him to the Hells Angels, about how he had been searching his entire life for purpose and meaning. He said that working on this house, discovering the connection between Harold and his father, had given him something he never thought he would find: a sense of closure. A feeling that his father's legacy lived on, a belief that maybe his father had guided him to this place, to this moment, to repay the debt that had allowed Carlos to exist. Harold embraced Carlos like a son. The two men stood there holding each other, connected across generations by an act of heroism 50 years earlier. The crowd watched in respectful silence, understanding they were witnessing something sacred. The debt had been repaid. The circle was complete. As the celebration continued, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. 5 years earlier, he had sat in his mother's apartment reading letters she had written to a son who never responded. He had made a promise to honor her memory by helping others. He had no idea then that keeping that promise would lead to this, that it would transform not just his own life, but the lives of his brothers, an entire community, and potentially the future of motorcycle clubs across the country. The Guardian Angels program officially launched 1 month after the Millbrook celebration. Within the first year, Hells Angels chapters in 15 states had established similar programs. They helped hundreds of families. They rebuilt homes destroyed by natural disasters. They assisted elderly veterans with home repairs. They provided financial support for medical bills. They organized community events that brought people together. The program faced challenges. Some chapters struggled to get community support because of lingering stigma. Some local governments were resistant, suspicious of the Hells Angels' motives. There were incidents where members reverted to old behaviors and had to be removed from the program. But overall, the Guardian Angels program succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. It changed how many people viewed motorcycle clubs. It gave members a sense of purpose beyond the traditional club activities. It created bridges between groups that had never interacted positively before. Marcus became the public face of the program. He gave interviews, spoke at community events, and worked tirelessly to expand the initiative. He never sought personal glory. Every speech, every interview, every public appearance was about honoring his mother's memory and proving that people deserve second chances. He talked openly about his criminal past, about his mistakes, about the years he wasted living a destructive life. He did this not to glorify that past, but to show that change is possible, that redemption is real, that no one is beyond saving. Harold and Martha Thompson lived in their beautifully rebuilt house for the rest of their lives. They remained close friends with Marcus and many of the other Hells Angels who had helped them. Marcus visited them regularly, sometimes alone, sometimes with his club brothers. They celebrated holidays together. They supported each other through challenges. They had become family in the truest sense. In 2022, 3 years after the house was rebuilt, Harold passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was 76 years old. His funeral was attended by over 1,000 people, including more than 100 Hells Angels from across the country. They rode in formation, a procession of motorcycles that stretched for miles, paying respect to a man who had shown them kindness when the world showed them fear. Marcus gave one of the eulogies. He called Harold his second father, the man who had helped him understand that strength comes in many forms, and that the greatest strength is the willingness to help others without expecting anything in return. Martha lived 2 more years after Harold's death. She remained in the house they had rebuilt together, surrounded by memories and love. Marcus visited her every week, making sure she was cared for, bringing her groceries, fixing anything that needed repair. When Martha passed away in 2024, at the age of 75, she left a letter for Marcus. In it, she thanked him for being the son she had gained late in life. She told him that his mother was surely proud. She encouraged him to continue the work he had started, to never stop helping others, to never forget that one person can make a difference. Marcus carried that letter with him every day. It was his reminder, his inspiration, his proof that the choices we make matter, that we can overcome our past, that we can honor those we have lost by living in a way that makes them proud. The Guardian Angels program continues to this day. It has expanded internationally, with chapters in Canada, Europe, and Australia establishing similar initiatives. Thousands of families have been helped, countless lives have been changed. The Hells Angels, an organization that spent decades being defined by their criminal reputation, now has a growing reputation for charitable work and community service. They have not abandoned their core identity. They are still a motorcycle club with strict rules and a strong sense of brotherhood. But they have added a dimension that many people never thought possible. The house on Maple Street in Millbrook, Tennessee, stands as a monument to what happened there. The current residents, a young family who bought it from the Thompson estate, know the full story. They maintain the house with pride, understanding they are living in a piece of history. A plaque on the porch, installed by the city, tells the story of Hurricane Delilah, the elderly couple who lost everything, and the Hells Angels who rebuilt it all. The plaque ends with a quote from Harold Thompson: "Angels come in many forms. Sometimes they wear leather and ride motorcycles." Marcus Hammer Johnson is now 52 years old. He still rides with the Hells Angels. He still wears the patches with pride. But he is also known as something else: a humanitarian, a community leader, a man who proved that change is possible. He has been invited to speak at colleges, community centers, and even law enforcement conferences. He does not pretend to represent all Hells Angels or all motorcycle clubs. He simply tells his story. The story of a man who lost his way, who lost his mother, who found redemption in helping others. He keeps a photograph in his wallet. It shows him standing between Harold and Martha Thompson on the day the house was completed. All three of them are smiling. Harold has his arm around Marcus's shoulder. Martha is holding Marcus's hand. They look like family, because that is what they became. And next to that photo is another one. His mother, Linda Johnson, smiling at the camera, taken years before she got sick. Marcus looks at both photos every day. They remind him why he does what he does, why he will continue doing it for the rest of his life. The story of the Hells Angels biker who saw an old couple rebuilding after the storm and said, "Stop, I got this," is more than just a story about rebuilding a house. It is a story about rebuilding lives, about breaking down barriers, about proving that humanity exists in unexpected places, about showing that redemption is possible for anyone willing to do the work, about demonstrating that one moment of kindness can ripple outward and change everything. This is the true story of Marcus Johnson, Harold and Martha Thompson, and the Hells Angels, who rebuilt more than just a house in Millbrook, Tennessee. It is a story that challenges our assumptions, breaks our stereotypes, and reminds us that we are all capable of more than our worst moments define. Now we want to hear from you. What do you think about this story? Do the Hells Angels deserve a second chance in the eyes of society? Would you have trusted Marcus when he first appeared at your door? How do we balance someone's past with their present actions? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, and we genuinely want to know your perspective. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell so you never miss our videos. We bring you real stories about real people who inspire, challenge, and move us. Stories that matter, stories that make you think. And before you go, click on the next recommended video. We have more incredible true stories waiting for you. Stories about courage, transformation, and the unexpected ways people change the world. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of our community. Until next time, remember that angels come in many forms, and sometimes the most unexpected people can teach us the most important lessons about humanity.